Thank you so much. Poonamji, Bhavnaji, Arushiji, all the esteemed hosts who have joined today, and all the members of Nest. At the very outset, I would like to extend my greetings and my respect to Shraddheya Manmohanji. I happen to be quite fortunate in this regard that I have been a witness of the overall processes of the inception and conceptualization of Nest Bharat, and I must consider myself as privileged that in a few interactions, Shraddheya Manmohanji, he did discuss the overall vision behind this NEST Bharat. So thank you so much, first of all, for inviting me to engage myself with this rather very robust gathering of the Nest Bharat. I'm not saying this to score any point, but honestly speaking, the most peculiar feature of the Nest Bharat that appeals to me as an Indian, as a Bharatiya, is that uh, the members of Nest Bharat are the ones who actually, in the most truthful sense of the word, they determine and shape and direct the future of any society. So, my most humble greetings first of all, are due to this very association, this very gathering, this organization of Nest Bharat, and my best wishes for the civilizational work that all of us are involved into, and particularly what Nest envisions as भारत को मानो भारत को जानो भारत के बनो and भारत को बनाओ. So this vision, may it always be our guiding principle and inspiration for your engagement with the very cause of the Nest Bharat. So I would like to start with an anecdote. We all are aware of the topic, and the flyer has introduced the topic also, this anti-civilizational project called Marxism. So before I touch upon the topic as such, I would like to share one anecdote. I mean, and the whole world actually is connected to uh, one thinking at this moment, right now, when we are talking about something. It's the Christmas Eve. So uh, I was trying to speculate and plan my session and as to how shall I enter the topic. And suddenly I remembered like what I shared today with some of my students, my post-graduation students in Ferguson College. They found that anecdote quite interesting. And I'm sure you all are already aware of that anecdote, but I would like to make that as a starting point. In the background, there is this there is this topic called civilization. There is this idea called civilization because when we talk about cultural Marxism uh, being an antithesis of civilization or a detrimental force insofar as the aspirations of a civilization, the future of any civilization is concerned, cultural Marxism is often understood as a detrimental force, an undercurrent which goes on causing a lot of damage to any civilization, the fabric of the society, etc. So uh, I'm thinking about the presence of a civilization. And when I did some um, mental exercise at my end on uh, how would I go about this topic today with this esteemed gathering. Uh, I I thought that I'll start from the earliest beginning of what could be understood as an anti-civilizational project. See, technically speaking, cultural Marxism is an ideological development that popped up on the canvas, on the screen of Europe somewhere around the second decade of the 20th century. However, cultural Marxism was a reaction against classical Marxism, and it was a project of the new left. If classical Marxism was the precursor, if it was an earlier condition, if classical Marxism or traditional Marxism or conventional Marxism was a prerequisite for the presence of something called cultural Marxism, we also need to find out as to what is classical Marxism. By classical Marxism, what I mean is what Karl Marx did, what Karl Marx preached, what Karl Marx wrote about, and what was disseminated in the name of Marxian ideology or Marxian socialism and all. If classical Marxism was a reaction, there was another prior condition which led Europe to this ideological condition of Marxism or the influence of Marxist socialism. So, the prerequisite of classical Marxism, the prior condition of classical Marxism was Industrial Revolution, A, and the Christianization of Europe. It's 25th of December tomorrow. In India, at least, more than half of the people enjoying the overall hues and colors of this festival called the Christmas, probably it's the FOMO factor. They don't want to miss out so much of fun, so much of enjoyment that's happening around. So, the anecdote that I wanted to share with you, it's about Christmas. Constantine was the Roman emperor who gifted Rome to Christianity. So, in the historical sense, Constantine was the Roman emperor who accepted Christianity as his faith. And Constantine matters because the efflorescence and the glory of the Roman civilization, the ancient Roman civilization, it came to a seizure, it came to a closure with the conversion of Constantine. I'm talking about the logic of the Christian temporal linearity. Today we call it that temporal linearity is defined, that benchmark in the progress of time is defined with the initials AD, Anno Domini, after the dominion of Christianity. After Constantine gifted Rome to Christianity, he accepted Christianity, and that was, in one sense, a last nail in the coffin of the pagan culture. Constantine accepting Christianity led to an acceptance of monotheism. Europe itself was a polytheist society before the advent and spread and dominion of Christianity. They were pagans. Etymologically, the word pagan means the elders, the seniors, the elders. After the advent of Christianity, the spread and dominion of Christianity, the connotation of the word pagan got transformed. A non-believer came to be called a pagan. One who doesn't believe in the fundamental principles and dogmas of Christianity is a pagan. There are several such names. Abrahamic systems have different understandings of non-believers. Abrahamic, Judaic, and Semitic systems. These are monotheist systems. So paganism or pagan cultures came to a closure, an arbitrary closure, an irrational closure, because there was this norm that prevailed in Europe, which allowed the faith system to convert the entire population then overnight. You convert the king, the subjects of the king get converted automatically. That's precisely what happened in Europe. Constantine converted to Christianity, all the people of Rome became Christians. Some members of the court of Constantine was old already. He was already suffering from senile weakness. So the members of the court of Constantine, they went to their emperor and they asked him a question. The question was about a particular pagan festival which the Europeans would observe and celebrate, especially in the last 2 weeks of December. Gregorian calendar was accepted. It was commonly followed in Europe back then. So one of the members of the court of Constantine, the last Roman emperor who gifted Rome to Christianity, one of the members of his own court asked his emperor, His Highness, what will happen to the pagan festival which we have been celebrating and enjoying since ages or generations? Constantine's response was like, what's the whole point? Why do we stop celebrating the pagan culture? The member of the court again added that, His Highness, we can't have these oppositions coexisting. Either you worship a god according to the monotheist systems, you worship a single god, the absolute God, the only God, or the Son of God, or you follow the pagan cultures. You can't have these binaries coexisting. You can't have these oppositions coexist. Constantine's response was to the member, tell me, when was Jesus born? The member replied, His Highness, it's April. Constantine said, I am the emperor. I will decide the date of when was Jesus born. Bring him to December. And that changed the course of history for Europe. The actual period, historically speaking, if you go by the chronicles and if you go by the information that you get in the Hebrew Bible, Jesus was born in the month of April, but because Constantine, who was emperor, who could be not wrong ever, because he wanted the date to be pulled earlier, just because he wanted to eat the cake and have it too, just because he wanted the same enthusiasm and joy and fun of the pagan festival which the polytheists in Europe would celebrate in the second half of December or the last 2 weeks of December. He didn't want to give up on that, and at the same time, there was this pressure of Anno Domini, the dominion of Christianity, and that is how the date of the birth of Jesus was pulled earlier, and December was declared, 25th of December was declared as the date, so that they could have Christmas and the celebrations of the pagan culture. The European civilization, with all its diversity, which existed in Europe prior to the advent of Christianity, which was, I mean, they had nature worshippers. There was an element of eco-spirituality even in their lifestyle. All this was compromised, neutralized, and it was destroyed thanks to the Anno Domini, thanks to the establishment of Christianity, thanks to the spread of Christianity in Europe. What an irony is this, that Christian system of faith, which is founded on the principle of monotheism, hijacked the most fascinating annual event, a saga of celebration which celebrated differences in nature, differences in Prakriti, differences in Srishti. Pagan cultures are attitudinally, pagan cultures are congenitally, they celebrate diversity. They celebrate differences because nature does not offer singularity of existence. Nature is congenitally pluralistic. So were the pagan cultures. So are the pagan cultures even today. So the civilization in Europe was first destroyed. The ancient Greco-Roman civilization was first destroyed by Christianity. I repeat, what an irony it is that a false history of somebody who wasn't actually born on that date and in that period, a false history becomes a cause of celebration for the entire world today. Christianity and its establishment was the first most devastating anti-establishment, anti-civilizational establishment project. It destroyed the pagan culture. It destroyed the ancient Greco-Roman civilizations. It destroyed plurality. It destroyed polytheism. It destroyed diversity in the world. Now you look at Europe from this perspective of Christianization of Europe. You will understand that Europe was colonized prior to what Europe did to the world in the 19th century in the name of colonization. And that is why anti-civilization project is actually a global phenomenon. With the advent and spread of Christianity, the pagan cultures were destroyed. We find that the entire European society had been going through several periods of unrest, insurgencies, revolutions, and total unsettlement. That is why revolution mongering is the attitudinal framework, the attitudinal structure, or it is the structural make of the European character. They revolutionize sometimes to the extent and with such an aggression that they miss out bringing in constructive change in the conditions of reality. So they mistake revolution for change. We talk about the Renaissance movement. The Renaissance movement, which roughly started off around the year 1000 and continued in the field of literature and art until almost till as late as the second half of the 17th century. The Renaissance movement, the reawakening of art and literature and knowledge and everything, which established Renaissance humanism as the ideological direction for Europe. The Renaissance humanism or the Renaissance movement, which technically means reawakening, Naissance is a French word and Renaissance means reawakening, was actually a rebellion. It was actually a revolt against the fundamental principles of Christianity, but they were hijacked. The project or the overall vision of the Renaissance movement, behind the Renaissance movement, it was hijacked by the evangelicals, by the leaders of Christianity, because by that time, the Roman Catholic Church had established itself as a very, very strong and politically, it had become the power center for entire Europe. It would practically intervene it would practically interrupt and intervene anywhere and anything. That is why in England there was a resentment against the Roman Catholic Church. Queen Elizabeth rebelled against that. And Queen Elizabeth, from her own court, she nurtured the sentiment of anti-Roman Catholicism, and Protestantism was marketed and branded by Queen Elizabeth. She became a firebrand militant activist of England in the pursuit of establishment of Protestantism. Historically, Europe as a civilization had been under a siege. It had been always into a condition of insurgency, destability, unsettlement, fights, conflicts, and everything. If Marxism and cultural Marxism, they became the conditions, obviously, in Europe, we need to understand why did they become conditions in Europe? Because the connection between cultural Marxism and India today, the connection between classical Marxism and India today, that connection could be unfolded if we understand the various aspects of Marxism, classical Marxism, and cultural Marxism in the global context. Because we can't isolate ourselves from these global phenomena. What we are going through at present is basically a cultural after effect of this global phenomena. So, this is the foundation of the European society called the Christian society or the European society. East India Company, when it settled in India, it gave a permission for proselytization of the subjects of the empire. The religious conversions were officially started by the East India Company by appointing some missionaries in the year 1813. So it was not a plain and a naive apolitical and secular program of colonization. So we need to understand the dynamics of the making of the society of Europe. Nationhood, the concept of nationhood in Europe. The concept of nationhood came to a prominence after the spread and dominion of Christianity, A, B, after the Industrial Revolution. Because the idea of demarcation of land, the idea of physical borders, denotating the limits and expanse and scope of a nation state, that idea itself is the product of industrial revolution. So nation as a word, it originated in the Bible, again in the same Christian philosophy, ideology, but its socio-cultural and political implications became more rigid, became more concrete during the industrial revolutions. That is why, look at Europe. It is one single expanse of land. Geographically, in reality, the definition of a continent requires you to know that the continent must be surrounded by a huge water body. And also, a certain percentage and volume of the water body must be present through the nooks and corners of a continent. Whereas you look at the map of Europe in the atlas, it's one single continuous, contiguous land which is separated with the borders, the demarcations. And the demarcation, the logic of the demarcation, the logic of the borders between nations in Europe is language. It's all over the same Christian society, but you speak different language, you're a different nation. So linguistically formulated nation states. It is this making of European society which stands in the backdrop of whatever happened in the 19th century. First, the Industrial Revolutions. Second, the most problematically, most nauseatingly unaccommodative temperament of this Abrahamic faith system called Christianity. Why am I saying they are the most unaccommodative, the most illiberalist system? This is because the project of colonization, as I said, they created this impression all over the world that it was for the betterment of the third world. It was a civilizing mission. They did not refrain from the programs of proselytization, the projects of religious conversions in the name of services, in the name of civilization, and the whole idea of modernity, which is so lopsided, which is so myopic, which is so superficial, that whole idea of modernity was established in the consciousness of the people who lived in the global south, the South, and the Southeast Asian countries. So the entire global south was compelled to buy one, industrialization as modernization, two, westernization as modernization. Westernized modernization is equal to civilizations. Industrialized modernization is equal to civilizations. So you perpetually stay under the control of the global West if you must become a civilization, or if you aspire for this status and dignity as a civilization. In the backdrop of this supremacist, hegemonic, in the backdrop of this non-accommodative or unaccommodative tendency of the Christianized belief system of Europe when industrial revolution popped up on the European scene. It did not remain, it did not remain purely industrializations. It rather became, the industry rather became a handy weapon in the hands of these power mongering Europeans. That is how East India Company was followed by the British Army, followed by the Empire, and in 1857, after the 1857 War of Independence, uh, East India Company handed over the powers and the control of India to the Empire or to the Queen of England. Until then, they continued with this stance that we are there to do some trade, to practice some trade and business, and so on and so forth. That is absolutely a lopsided history. To cut it short, the Industrial Revolution was such a breakthrough in the European society that Europe itself was not at all prepared to digest this breakthrough. They didn't know what they were doing. It was most criminally unplanned program, the industrial revolutions. Science came as a handy instrument again. So even today, in the European sense, in the Eurocentric sense, science and industry are inseparable. So whatever science, whatever epistemological work, whatever ontological deliberation, innovation you plan to do in this world, whatever knowledge you want to produce in the world in the name of science, if it does not result into the empowerment and the strengthening of the industrial aspirations, that knowledge would be disregarded as science. As if there is no other way, there is no other methodology, there is no other outcome of what exists in the world as scientific thinking and scientific knowledge and scientific attitude. Another fundamental problem with the Industrial Revolution was that, in the sociological sense, it turned out to be a fiasco because the European societies, they were totally unprepared to face the challenge of the culturally distinct identity of the working class population. They just didn't know who they are or who these people are. The working class population. So it's very simple. Economy was agrarian economy prior to the advent of industry. Even in Europe, but the entire Europe became the deserted village, the proverbial deserted village, which is portrayed by Oliver Goldsmith, one of the most celebrated British poets who criticized the civilization, who criticized the Industrial Revolution because it prepared the path for this unplanned Industrial Revolution in the world. Unplanned because they did not do their homework in terms of preparation for facing the challenge of the rise of a culturally distinct class in the European society, the working class population. There is a sociologist who wrote a book, The Making of the English Working Class, Thompson, Thompson. He talks about this unplanned industrial revolution. And because this class, the working class, suddenly popped up on the scene of the social structure of Europe and especially England, it suddenly popped up. The elites, the aristocrats, the financial elites and the cultural elites, they just didn't know how to handle, how to manage and control the aspirations of this newly emerged class in the social structure of European society. That is how this divide got created in European society. The divide between the financial haves, the economically rich class, and the working class, the have not. In the backdrop of this disruption of the social fabric of the European society on account of this unplanned industrial revolution, which was guided by the same Christianized society, which always practiced binarism, which always lived and throbbed with this problematic sentiment of us versus others, because of which class structures got created in the European society. It's because of this same lapses in the Christian or Christianized belief system that this lopsided, unplanned industrial revolution, it was triggered, and the fallout was a working class, a fully emerged working class population, and they did not know what to do with this class, with their aspirations, how to respond to their aspirations, how to get assimilated with them as the members of the same society, how to practice inclusiveness with the cultural aspirations, the cultural manifestations, the cultural expressions of the working class population. They did not know that. Result: class structures in European societies. Karl Marx did not fall from above. Karl Marx emerged from the same society which was divided. So it was pretty obvious for anybody. You don't require a Marx to understand what was going wrong with the social structures, with the economic structures, what is going wrong with the base and the superstructure, and where was the problem lying exactly. So Marx definitely had these political insights, and he incorporated the fact of economic inequalities and inequities that prevailed in European societies. They provided a ready ammunition for Karl Marx. So it was obvious that he filled his barrel with this ammunition. Karl Marx defines economy or the social structure with the base and superstructure model. According to Karl Marx, economy is the base of human existence on the planet. Everything else that humans do is a superstructure for Marx. Culture is a superstructure. That is why he puts religion in the basket of superstructure. That is why he calls it a pill of opium, something that doesn't exist in reality, something which is just an illusion. Yes, Daminiji, you raised your hand.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Actually, your presentation is not moving. It is still on first slide.
No, I haven't actually started up with the contents of the presentations, if you don't mind.
Okay, sir. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
But thanks for that question. I got the opportunity to have a sip. I badly needed some water. So, the foundation of classical Marxism takes place in the year 1848 when he brought out his Communist Manifesto. And in the Communist Manifesto, Marx made an appeal to the world. I often wonder what conceptualization or what understanding and insight did Karl Marx possess in his mind about the word world? Because he hadn't been outside Europe until he migrated first to the United States and then he settled in England. He hadn't ever been to the other parts of the world. But still, I mean, he was exposed to the reality of, and he had an experiential understanding of the hyper capitalist and imperialist European world, and that is what he always understood as the world. So his conceptualization of the world requires us to know that when he uses the word world, he means Europe. So, Marx said in Communist Manifesto, may the workers of the world unite and launch a proletariat revolution against the capitalists of the world. And this appeal for revolution that was given by Karl Marx, it was based on this model, the model of socialist revolution. What is the model? We talked about it. Economy is the base, everything else is a superstructure, and hence the revolution has to strike at its base, that is economy. So why revolution? With the participation and involvement and aggression of the workers, they're at the base. In industrial economic structures of the society, workers are at the base. They are perpetually the have not class. They are perpetually the dissatisfied class. They are perpetually the class which is oppressed by default. And the capitalists are perpetually the class that oppresses them, that dominates them, that controls the life of the workers, and so on and so forth. So economy is the base. Everything else is a superstructure. 1848 Communist Manifesto. The aftermath, the after effect of this spread of Marxian socialism, it was quite remarkable in Europe. This is not to say that Marx did not win any audience. Marx definitely did win the audience, because if you look at the work of Karl Marx strictly in the context of the socio-cultural and political and economic conditions and inequalities that prevailed in European society all through the second half of the 19th century, you understand that it was obvious for anybody who is sensible enough to make sense of the reality around. It was obvious for anybody to become conscious of this divide. Marx became conscious of this divide. And he wrote about that. And he did have some political insights, and he wanted to transform the society through his intellectual work, whatever he did. So he did win some audience. The followers of Marx, the followers of Marx capitalized Marx. They disseminated his ideology. They made him famous, and then he did win some followers all over Europe, and so on and so forth. However, Europe did not develop an appetite to practice the theory of Marxian socialism, in spite of the fact that Marx was sitting at his home in United Kingdom all through the period when England was preparing itself and actually executing the most problematic and criminally executed project of colonization. Marx was a witness of the project of colonization right from England itself. Europe did not practice that. Interestingly, at the turn of the century, the second the second decade of the 20th century, around 1917, Russia, USSR became the laboratory of Marxian socialism. Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, right from 1910 onwards, 1915 onwards, right up to 1950s and 60s, USSR had been under insurgencies, revolution mongering, and total instability in terms of everything. Russian Revolution failed. 1917. Prior to that, 1914, the First World War. 1939, the Second World War. And interestingly enough, the second decade of the 20th century, there was a guy in Italy who was observing this origin, spread, popularity, decline, and irrelevance of Marxian socialism. He was Antonio Gramsci. And Antonio Gramsci, who was the founder of the Communist Party of Italy, he asked some basic questions to the very premise of the base and superstructure theory of Karl Marx, which was the foundation and the model for socialist revolution. And the first pertinent question raised by Antonio Gramsci was, is economy the base of everything or it's something else? Do humans live only in the pursuit of monetary gains? Is materialism the only aspect and the only cause of human life on this planet, or there is something else? There is something more to it. It was Antonio Gramsci who turned Marx's model of base and superstructure almost upside down. And according to him, culture became the most prominent and the most overpowering entity which drives the consciousness of humans. It was Antonio Gramsci who found some serious lapses and gaps in the logic of classical Marxism, and it was Antonio Gramsci who re-narrativized, redefined classical Marxism as cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism became a necessity for Gramsci for the perpetuation of socialism. Marx was compromised. Marxism was compromised. Socialism was not. According to Karl Marx, the workers are those members of the human societies in different parts of the world who are most fitted for the execution of the goals and ideals of a revolution. Why? Because they are oppressed economically. Hence the trade unions, hence the workers' unions, hence the strike, Kam Band Andolan, and so on. Did not work. This method did not work. Instead of launching a proletariat revolution against the capitalists of the world, the workers did unite to participate and contribute into their respective national economies and industrial growths. And this competition and rivalry reached and it got escalated as a deep-seated animosity and rivalry, a destructive form of rivalry amongst some European nations and some global superpowers. They pitted against one another. So the workers did not contribute into the socialist revolutions. On the contrary, they contributed into the capitalist programs or the industrial idealism, industrial imperialism of their respective nations. This got escalated into the First World War in 1914. That was an absolute blow, a final blow to classical Marxism. And that is why Gramsci, along with some of his followers, was compelled to readdress, revisit, and to re-examine the authenticity and validity of the logic of revolution and socialism as given by Karl Marx. And then comes Gramsci with the logic of cultural Marxism. I'll ask you a question here. If Karl Marx found workers as the most fitted human instruments to launch revolutions and to succeed with the logic of revolution and to pull down the prevalent structures of a capitalist society, and if Gramsci is giving an alternative structure for revolutions, who would be most fitted to launch a revolution in the cultural realm of the world, according to Gramsci? Gramsci found four major categories: women, youth, minorities, and the downtrodden people in all the societies. Women of the world, of all times, of all places, are perpetually dominated, subjugated, marginalized. Gramsci. Hence, cultural issues pertaining to the existence of women on the planet in different societies. One, two, cultural issues related to youth in all the societies, because the established understanding of culture, it kind of develops an attitude of certain corrective methods being employed against the youth, and that's why they are a little more dominating. The elderly members of any society, they perpetually find faults with the Gen Zs, and the other generations, and too, and that's why engage more with the youth and pull them in the realm of revolution, attract them, drag them into the logic of revolution. Three, minorities of all kinds: linguistic minority, racial minority, national minorities, political minorities, gender minorities, sexuality and minority. So the transgenders and the LGBTQ and the queer activism, the LGBTQ plus and so on and so forth. So they are sexual minorities. So bring them all together. Let there be a rainbow alliance. Gramsci's logic. The extension of the Gramscian logic of cultural socialism or cultural Marxism, now it has reached almost all over the world. Fourth category is the downtrodden class, the class which is perpetually dominated socially, culturally, politically, economically. So it could be black populations in United States, and it would be the Dalits in the Indian context, in the context of the social structures of India, and so on and so forth. This was introduced by Gramsci. Now, with the presentations, which are a few slides after this prolonged background and elaborations of the entire trajectory of European society, Christianization as a backdrop of the Industrial Revolution, and Industrial Revolution as the foundation for the development of the socialist sentiment in Europe and Marxian socialism, and then in 20th century a resistance of the rigidity of the classical Marxism and classical socialism, the failure of the Russian Revolution, the de-Stalinization of socialism, which was experienced by Europe in 1930s and 40s, and 1950s onwards. 1940s is again an important benchmark in the history, because political decolonization happened in 1940s thanks to the Second World War again, and by 1980s and 90s, when Europe and the United States, they geared up one more time to launch the project of colonizations, they brought in a model of economic globalizations, and as a result or a cultural after effect of the economic globalizations or the neo-colonization in terms of economy or through the channels of economy, what we are experiencing today in the global south is the cultural after effect of market driven globalization, which is controlled by the same colonizing forces, and which is again controlled and used as an opportunity by the same European and the American forces to establish the models of cultural Marxism through the means of academics and through the means of university education, the curriculum, and the whole lot of activism that happens on the campuses, through the NGOs, through the environmentalist activism, and so on and so forth. Its obvious results are seen today. These are a few agitation drives and a few rallies that were conducted, and the programs that were conducted by the supporters of this activism in the name of cultural Marxism. I'll just refer to these photographs. These photographs are the main slides that I have. Of course, there is a lot of content also, which I have already presented through my oral delivery instead of referring to the PPT. So this is where we have reached today as a society. Gramsci inspired and motivated these three professors to establish the Frankfurt School, the Neo Left, and cultural Marxism in Germany at Frankfurt. In 1930s, they migrated to Columbia University after the rise of the Nazi power in Germany, and they started controlling and influencing the academic institutions, universities, and the higher educations in United States all through 1930s to 1990s. And as I said earlier, 1990s onwards, with the wake of economic globalizations, we all accepted, the third world countries accepted the model of economy in like which has got proliferated with this policy of globalizations. Hence what we are experiencing today in our own society is a revolution of values in the name of liberalism, in the name of alternative consciousness, uniformity of thoughts. So the ultimate target of the supporters of cultural Marxism is to pull down the local structures of overall existence of humans in different societies and to re-establish the socialist state and to turn that society into a socialist state. So this is the circuit of the neo-left or the cultural Marxism as we call it popularly. Critical theory, academic left, followed by cultural studies as a discipline, social anthropology, liberal studies, gender studies, alternative politics, and ultimately to turn the society into a socialist state. Stuart Hall, who was one of the founders of cultural Marxism through an academic discipline called cultural studies in England, he said this popularly. The discipline called cultural studies works towards the motto cultural studies does not study culture, it makes one. Cultural Marxism does not promote culture, it makes culture Marxist and socialist. Oh, I'm so sorry. I read the message right now that the slides were not seen. I mean, I don't know why it happened because I'm still sharing the PPT and I kept switching the slides. Um, so that's all I have to I have to say about cultural Marxism. Okay, it's visible now. Well, interestingly, I closed the presentation now. I switched
So
on
it
to
was visible. It was visible all
okay,
along.
okay. Yeah. So this is about cultural Marxism. It's a slightly complex area of research and study. All of us are experiencing it today in the name of wokeism, in the name of woke culture, and a total disruption in the social cultural fabrics of the indigenous societies, and the indigenous values are being questioned, challenged, refuted, and so on and so forth. Um, I personally feel, to be very honest, that the college youth, the Gen Z, whom we find as slightly rebellious and a bit reactive in nature, so we shouldn't be jumping on the conclusion that because of their subversive attitude and their generally critical attitude of the Indian ontological, epistemological reality, the Indian knowledge system, the Indian value system, the cultural values, the traditions, and so on and so forth. instead of jumping onto the conclusions that they have become leftists or they have become socialists in their ideological orientations, it would be really beneficial to engage ourselves with some constructive talk with the younger lots, and also to delineate and to unfold the entire trajectory of cultural Marxism to them, so that they understand that there are certain political undercurrents, there are certain political paybacks which are being aspired for by these people who are in support of cultural Marxism through academics and in the Bollywood, in the field of art, in the field of drama and music and so on and so forth. So this is how we will succeed in offering an alternative perspective instead of reacting and instead of criticizing or reducing. So this reductionist approach is not going to help us, and that's why, as I said initially, it's a global phenomena of an imposition of certain socialist values and socialist dogmas and principles and ideologies. So if socialism is making itself popular through cultural Marxism, which our younger generation is finding a little fascinating today, it's high time that we come up with a very robust approach to offer an alternative in the form of a culturally generated liberalism generated from the soil of the great civilization that is Bharat. At the end of the day, I would only say this, that physics defines darkness as the absence of light. Darkness does not have, night does not have an existence or an independent form to be. It's because the light is absent. So if the light and the brightness of Bharat and Bharatiyata, Bharat ko jano, Bharat ko mano, Bharat ke bano, Bharat ko banao, if the elimination of Indianness, if it enters and enlightens our consciousness, the darkness of ignorance and the darkness of ideological rigidity would vanish in an instant. Thank you so much one more time for inviting me. I'm sorry I couldn't keep up with time. As I said, this topic is quite complex and it's very vast, so I couldn't really complete and accommodate everything in the stipulated time frame. We also ran behind the schedule, behind the time, because as I said initially, there was bit of a medical situation. I had to take my father to a doctor, and then there we got a bit delayed. So thank you so much for all your patience and your participation, and also listening to me. And thank you again for inviting me. Namaste.